Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. We talk a lot about the divide growing in the church in our time, especially in the aftermath of Fiducia Supplicans, related documents to it, including the promised, not ever going to be clarified, but eventually clarified clarification we got, but also things that were leading up to it. The ability now for James Martin pairings to be godparents and for them to participate in baptisms and all sorts of other things that shocked the consciences of Catholics when they were announced. We saw the aftermath of this. Priests and various dioceses, as well as bishops we've covered endlessly here, saying no, while other bishops saying you can't say no. I will remind you, directly relevant to this story, several days ago I reported on a letter from the several priests in Italy, hundreds of them really, saying they were not going to provide the blessings in question. Looks like they're not going to be allowed to do that. So let's get into that story here now. But first, let's check in with the unique and sole expression of the Roman Rite, as we like to do from time to time. And so I want to turn to Novus Ordo Watch for this one. No, I'm not a sedevacantist, but I do think they do interesting reporting here. And as we see from a tweet they shared, just to give you an idea about the cultural divide in the church, we see this from Novus Ordo Watch, quote, Austrian Novus Ordo parish live streams a powder dance in church sanctuary where the person in the dance is not wearing much. Pastor shrugs, claims Christ is world's most frequently depicted person without much on in the world. And as you can see the picture there, that picture was redacted by Novus Ordo Watch, which I thank them for their actual restraint, because not everybody would be restrained in doing that. And you can see a person, I believe a woman, is being projected into a parish right above the tabernacle, by the way. If you look on that image, that's a tabernacle in a parish that still has much of its traditional trappings, where they are doing this, because of course they are. So, with that burned into your mind, let's take a look at what is now acceptable in the springtime of the Church of the New Advent, this synodal church that we are being told is now how we are to refer to the Catholic Church, according to the maniacs running the Synod of Synodality. For this story, we go to EWTNVatican.com for this headline. Italian bishops welcome Fiducia Supplicans. It is situated on the horizon of mercy. Mercy. There it is again. Again, a few weeks ago, I reported on how hundreds of priests in Italy said no to Fiducia Supplicans. Now, their bishops are basically not letting them say no. The blessings will be allowed regardless of how their priests seem to feel about it. Do you remember how Fiducia Supplicans said that this was not to be decided by bishops, that it was to be decided by the individual priests? Do you remember how that was supposed to be like the big safeguard for this? In the clarification document later, of course, Cardinal Fernandez made it pretty clear that the only people who aren't going to be permitted to do this are the African bishops because of the sociological reasons unique to Africa, while then telling them they need to go out there and work to change the culture to make it safe for them to do the blessings in question. Well, here now we see this happen to the Italian bishops. The Italian bishops are embracing this. The Italian priests are being told basically to fall in line. Do you see how this works? Again, mercy. Mercy, mercy, mercy. And those of us who have been covering this endlessly since December 18th when that document first dropped warned that this is how it would play out. There would be no wiggle room for priests to, with their conscience intact, say no. Let's take a look at what's actually being said here, though. From the article, quote, Cardinal Zuppi, president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, has announced that the country's bishops have welcomed the Fiducia Supplicans Declaration, quote, a document situated on the horizon of mercy. The Italian cardinal, to whom the Holy Father has confirmed the mission of interceding on behalf of the Holy See to achieve peace in the country in Eastern Europe that you're still not allowed to mention explicitly on this platform, has made these statements in an extensive and resounding address to the Permanent Episcopal Council of the Italian Episcopal Conference, which is meeting this week in Rome. Zuppi specified that the document of the Dicastery of the Faith, quote, is situated within the horizon of mercy, of the loving look of the Church towards all children of God, without departing from the teachings of the Magisterium. In this regard, he stressed that in the text written by Cardinal Victor Fernandez and signed by the Holy Father, quote, the meaning of the sacrament of marriage is not questioned. Furthermore, the Archbishop of Bologna also recalled that, quote, God wants everyone to be saved, and that it is, quote, the task of the Church to be interested in each and every one of us. For this reason, he urged not to forget, quote, that all the baptized enjoy the full dignity of the children of God, and as such are our brothers and sisters. Next, the cardinal invited the Italian bishops not to allow themselves to be, quote, intimidated by merely sociological readings of the Church, or by a culture, quote, for which faith declines. Quote, it is the arrogance of pessimism which presents itself as realism. Pessimism becomes a kind of security and motivates laziness and habit, he warned. At the same time, he urged them to avoid being intimidated by, quote, readings of the Church that interpret our action as political. He reiterated that, quote, despite being open to dialogue, we will not let others tell us what the content of our charitable action or of our mission, which is never partisan, because the uniqueness of the Church is Christ, and the defense of the person, of life, from beginning to end is. Certain interpretations want to divide bishops and Christians, while on the other hand, I feel the communion between bishops and the people is alive, and this is worth more than the likes on social networks, he stated. Likewise, he recalled that, quote, there have been difficult years for the churches in Italy, especially after the Second Vatican Council, when the community seemed to disintegrate in opposition between groups, bishops, and protests. The Church confidently practiced an inclusive communion in listening to one another. Along these lines, he lamented that, quote, we are in an era in which the past and tradition are erased as if what preceded us were wrong or irrelevant. On the other hand, history, of which we are heirs, comforts us. According to Cardinal Zuppi, quote, crises present a weakened church, but he assured us that no one should be afraid of, quote, fragility and littleness. He also reiterated that, quote, despite pessimistic or political readings about the church, we realize the strength of charity, both Christians and priests, end quote. Zuppi's name is one that frequently comes up in lists of potential future successors to Francis, Francis II kind of name. And I would hope that you can tell from reading that, my reading of that he would be a very dangerous successor to Francis. He is on the same page with him ideologically in every way. But he is much craftier than Francis, much more self-restrained. You will not hear him go after people for being rigid, for clericalism and those kinds of things. And when he does bring up clericalism, he always frames it in a way that is very agreeable. He's a very dangerous potential successor to Francis, especially where he invoked how traditions are being erased. But he's 100% on the same page with Francis. That's why he was given such a key, high-profile position as being a peacemaker, essentially a Vatican diplomat, to the most high-profile conflict going on in the world in our time. Zuppi is speaking for the Italian bishops. They will comply with Fiducia Supplicans, he's saying. Apparently, regardless of what those priests that I mentioned before have to say on the matter. Are you surprised by any of this? I'm curious what you have to say in the comments on this, because truly we are seeing in our time the total, essentially disenfranchising of priests. They will do what they are told by Rome. Even if Rome initially says that the bishops are not to impose their will on them on this matter, they are being told they can't, that they have to submit to this document. Now, thankfully, a lot of bishops have said no, and have issued statements saying no, so the priests, in theory, will be protected. Of course, one has to wonder how there are plenty of, frankly, bad priests out there who will push these despite the fact that their bishop said no. Do you see how this internal divide is working? Over a sin that cries out to heaven for justice. The making this sin that cries out to heaven for justice normal in the eyes of the world and normal in the church. To have the church on the same page as the secular world, essentially. We're getting there. It is being done in the name of mercy. This potential successor of Francis. One successor of Francis among many. It's worth noting here, as I've mentioned before, that there are already forces in the background trying to prepare for the next conclave. Both of if Cardinal Pell were still alive, on his side of things, where they're trying to find a more moderate and conservative pope to follow Francis, as well as on the Bergoglian side. And it's worth noting that they are desperately looking for somebody who can continue the work of Francis without continuing the really negative side of Francis that they see, which is his ability to alienate literally everybody and make some pretty bad missteps, including giving somebody like Fernandez the job. So, I'm curious what you have to say about that, though. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Zuppi would be a profoundly dangerous figure to have in the papacy? Do you think the next pope will likely be a successor more like Benedict? I personally don't buy the same Malachi prophecy for a lot of reasons, but especially since, first and foremost, it doesn't line up with the rest of Catholic prophecy in the slightest. So I'm not buying that Francis is the last one. Doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, especially when you read that prophecy and it's very, very precise until the life of the person who found the prophecy, and then suddenly very vague afterwards for its predictions, which is not the stuff Catholic prophecy is made of. That's my take on it. So what do you think of Cardinal Zuppi? Do you think he is likely would be a very dangerous successor to Francis? Do you think it's likely to be somebody else? Do you think he's just doing the work of the Holy Father there? What do you tell me on all this? What you think about this in the comments, please. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, so to sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.